Hello, loves. We are doing chapter 3.2, which is Claudia's story. This is a little bit of a longer story, and so if you hear me pausing, it is because we are having work done, and I'm trying to film this as best as possible while there's quietness in my house, because a lot is happening. Anyway, we are going to get started. I already lost my page. No, I didn't. All right, here we go. I got pregnant on my 17th birthday, so 1967. I was living at home. I was a junior at, well, nowadays it would be called an alternative high school, but it was a private prep school. I hated public school. I did okay. I just hated the social aspect of it. I went to a high school in a new suburban area where if you weren't a cheerleader, you weren't anything, and I was an artistic weirdo. During that time, the most important thing in my life was my art. I was always drawing. Always, always. My life mostly revolved around a few friends, music, and drawing. I went to life drawing classes all the time, and there was a man in that drawing class that I thought was the most handsome man I had ever seen in my entire life. He was also an amazing artist. He was Cape Verdean Portuguese, and he was quite a bit older than me. He was 31 to my 17. His paintings were beautiful. Those were the kind of men I would have been attracted to, the hippie or artistic type. All right, pausing there, especially because recently I've seen on TikTok a lot of people talking about age gaps, and whether it's okay or not okay. Now, granted, we are talking about adoption, right? But this comes into play where older men or women sometimes find a spouse or a partner that is significantly younger and then expect them to rise to this level that they're not going to be at because of maturity and all these other things. And things happen, so like pregnancy could happen, or in the case, if it's an older woman, not necessarily pregnant, but maybe she's struggling to get pregnant, and things don't work out. So in this case, and this, and of course, I'm ranting here. In this case, this was back in the late 60s, mid 60s. So age gap was definitely a little bit more socially accepted. That doesn't make it necessarily right. It's kind of a very iffy thing, especially, and I'm not playing double standards here, but especially when it's someone who is 4+ years or older. Now, 4, 5, 6 years are kind of acceptable, but more than that, this person is more than that, right? This person knows better, and there are laws in place because of it. Now, that being said, we always talk about, how our lives are affected by adoption. Well, they're forcing women to give birth, which nobody should have to be forced to do that. And then they're telling them that they're too young to raise their children and not giving the support. So it's essentially forcing young women, especially those living in impoverished situations, even to this day, and they're lying to them and coercing them to give up their babies for an infant supply. And that's kind of the reason why Roe versus Wade was overturned. And again, I'm going to do a longer video just on that alone because I find that extremely problematic. But it's a whole issue, right? And we can rant about so many things when, little topics that come up in this, in different books. But anyway, we're going to move on to finish her story. All right. I didn't abuse any substances. I don't consider smoking a little pot abusing substances. Back then it was illegal. In most states and countries it's still illegal. But you can do your own research on that. I wasn't a big drinker and I was not promiscuous. At that point, I had only had sex with my first boyfriend, and I only had sex with him once. Then he moved on to somebody with bigger breasts. That's the truth. So anyway, it's the night of my 17th birthday. I was with my friend and we're excited. We're going to hang out and maybe meet some cute university guys. I had on a polyester stretch iridescent paisley psychedelic mini dress and those indigenous sandals, I am changing some words, that everybody wore where your toe goes through one thing. Okay. My friend had on a white peasant blouse with a little string and that puckering cutoffs and the indigenous sandals. So we're off for the evening to celebrate my birthday. We had taken the bus downtown from the suburb where we both lived, and we're walking up the street, and there, sitting on the front stoop of a house, was that gorgeous man from the art class. He sees us and says, "How are you girls doing?" And my girlfriend says, "It's Claudia's birthday, so we're out for the night. We're going to celebrate." He says, "If you girls want to come back here at 9:30 tonight, I'm having a party. It can be a birthday party for you too." Well, my heart dropped down into my lower abdomen. I could not believe he was talking to us. Never mind inviting us to a party. My heart was pounding. I'm dying. I just couldn't believe this because he was so handsome and he was this wonderful artist. So we go up the street, but of course nothing is going to compare with what we've got to look forward to. We walked back down later, and sure enough, he was having a big party. The people at the party were older, probably in their late 20s or early 30s, an interesting, artsy, eccentric crowd. My girlfriend hooked up pretty damn fast. She was adventurous and already sexually active and liberated, and I really wasn't. I was pretty naive, and in that whole realm, my mother told me about periods, and that was it, I never got anything except what I learned from friends. So sorry about that. That knock really scared me. Anyway, going back to where I was. Oh, God. So I really was very naive. I remember the older women kind of eyeballing us, but I was so honored and overwhelmed just being there and having fun. He totally focused on me, gave me tons of attention, and clearly led me to believe that he was interested in me. I couldn't think of anything else. I was in one of those states where you're really just so joyful that you can't believe it. That was on a Friday night, and before I left, he asked me very gently and respectfully if he could have my phone number, and would I like to get together sometime. I was dying. I gave him my phone number and said, absolutely. Now, I didn't know it, but at the time, he did have a girlfriend. She wasn't at the party. Only a couple of days passed, and he called me and said he wanted to see me. And this is what we did a lot of the time. I would cut school and go to his apartment. We would get out of work, and he would get out of work, and we basically just had sex. I don't remember the sex being particularly. It wasn't like I liked sex or didn't like sex. I just wanted to be with him. He never said anything about birth control, and I don't know what I was thinking. I got pregnant probably the first or second time I ever had sex with him. I got pregnant almost immediately. So here I am at this private school wearing this uniform, the gray flannel skirt, white shirt, and cranberry blousers. I'm taking Humphreys 11, a homeopathic preparation for irregular or delayed periods by the bottle fill. There was this legend that Humphreys 11 would make you have your period. Nothing was happening. I wasn't getting a period. So I got to Planned Parenthood and get a pregnancy test, and it's positive. But my denial was pretty huge. I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I kind of created this fantasy in my head that something would happen that would fix this. I didn't even think of abortion. Abortion wasn't legal, which we're having a huge debate about that now in 2023. Terrible. I had known friends who had private abortions. If you had money, you could always get an abortion. Their mother's OBGYNs, wow. Excuse me, that did DNCs, but I was terrified of telling my mother. So little by little, my waistline is expanding, and I'm trying to hold my skirt together with pins. I started off with safety pins, then bigger and bigger, then diaper pins. The biggest pin I got was, at the time the kilts were very popular. Remember those pleated kilts that had the giant pin? That was the last frontier, the kilt pin. I knew I had to tell him, but in the meantime, it had become real apparent that I had become the other woman. I'm sneaking around someone else's back. I kind of know her and I feel guilty, but I'm addicted to being with this man because he kind of embodies everything that I think is spectacular about men. So that's what the relationship had evolved into. He was having an open relationship with her and I was sneaking around. I didn't feel good about it, but I continued to do it. Anyway, I was getting very big and I feel I have to tell him. So one night I'm babysitting, my parents are out, and I go into my mother's room, shut the door, pick up the phone, and I call him. I say, I have to talk to you. I'm pregnant. He says, get out of here. What are you talking about? I said, it's true. I am. I didn't say anything to you before, but now I'm sure. I've done the test and I'm really starting to show. I'm almost 4 months pregnant. He says, you're crazy. You can't be. There's no way. He keeps saying what I'm telling him isn't true. And I'm trying to be discreet and quiet on the phone, and finally I scream, you have to believe me, I'm pregnant. You are the only guy I've had sex with. I'm pregnant. My sister has been sitting outside the bedroom door, and I can hear her down the hallway. I walk out, and she looks at me and says, I'm telling Mommy. I immediately call my other girlfriend who has a car. I pack a bag, and I run away. I run away to a hippie flop house apartment where I knew some people, with bare mattresses and Jimi Hendrix and Jimmy Morrison posters on the walls. My girlfriend who was at the party with me knew where I was, but you could have put cigarettes out on her arm and she would never have told my mother. She never did. My mother went to her house and threatened her mother. She was hysterical, of course. I would have done the same if it was my daughter. My girlfriend reported to me daily. She was the most loyal friend and still is now. But I had another friend who lived with her fiancé, who knew where I was. She didn't have the same amount of backbone. My mom got to her and broke her down. I'm not judging because I understand now, as a mom, the terror of not knowing where your kid is. So maybe something short of a week had gone by, and my mother is absolutely hysterical. She's on Valium and diet pills, going absolutely mental. She's telling my friends I just need to come home. She eventually breaks my weaker girlfriend down. One morning, there's a knock on the door. I open the door, and there's my girlfriend with my mother standing behind her, peering into this room with the bare mattresses. My mother is crying and freaking out, and my friend is saying, I didn't want to tell her. Don't be mad. She made me tell her. My mother grabs me and hugs me and says, I don't care what's going on in your life. I know you're pregnant. You need to come home. We're going to take care of this. We're going to do whatever we need to do. She sounded like a mother, so I pack my things and I go home. Within a day or so, I'm shipped off to Dorchester, oh my God, I can't even say that, Massachusetts, to St. Mary's Home for the Unwed Mothers. In 1968, Dorchester and Roxbury, Massachusetts were literally burning from race riots. It was like being sent into a war zone. At the time, I went to the maternity home. My dad was commuting to Boston for work. My dad was kind of shut down, but I liked him. I felt a connection with him. He was really smart. He used to help me with my homework, and we talked about politics. He supported me going to art school. My mom didn't really respect me being an artist, but my dad respected it. He would give me art books, the really big coffee table kind on Picasso and on Surrealism and Dali. He didn't really like or know anything about art, but he supported and respected my interests. So those tiny little things my dad had done for me cemented our relationship, and I identified with him. My mom used to always say, oh, it's all fine and dandy that you're an artist, but you're never going to be able to do anything with it. You need to learn to do something to fall back on. You need a job within the city. That was my mother's mantra. Get a job with the city. The maternity home had really dark woodwork everywhere. Dark woodwork railings and lots of marble stairs. It was attached to the hospital, but it looked more like a house than a hospital. It looked like an old lady's house in England or something. It had that weird, disapproving grandmother feel to it. They had big dorm rooms where 4 girls slept in a room. You had a little twin bed with a dresser. There was a lunchroom, and they always had stewed tomatoes. They gave us water pills every day so we wouldn't retain fluids, yet they were feeding us all this high-sodium hospital food. So anyway, this is where I am. I'm 17, I'm at least 5 months pregnant, and I'm in this really weird place run by nuns. Their disapproval was palpable. They gave me the name Marcia. Everybody was given a fake name. I bonded with 3 of my roommates, and of course, we knew each other's real names. There were probably about 25 girls in the home at the time. The youngest was 14, and she was one of my roommates. The oldest was in her middle 30s. She was mildly, I'm not going to say this word, wasn't fully there, and had been raped. She had been raped and left on the side of the road. Let's just say she was mentally disabled. And yes, mentally disabled women are at a much higher risk of rape than anyone else, which is incredibly disgusting. Anyway, the intake nun was this really hard-looking woman. They all had mustaches. I'm sorry. I don't know why that should make me laugh. The nuns where I grew up were from this order. Where I grew up were from this order from Sicily that had lots of facial hair too. Nuns do not get rid of facial hair. I felt like I was plopped in an environment and given no choices whatsoever. You know, I've done the ultimate shameful thing, and this is the only answer to my problem, or the problem I've caused in my family. There was really never any counseling or therapy, but there was a dialogue, and this is what it was. You've done a really bad thing, and you have really sinned. You've committed the ultimate mortal sin, and there's a big difference between mortal sins and venial sins. Mortal sins are really bad sins that you've got to deal with, really make amends for. I don't remember any dialogue around having choices. You were here, you were going to be fed, and you're going to get your schooling. You were going to be taken care of, but you were going to have that baby, and you were going to do the only thing that is right. Well, according to them, right? You're going to give that baby up to good people, decent people, people who can take care of it because you are so bad and so flawed for just having this happened. And there's no way you could possibly provide what a child would need. All right, pausing there for a second. This still happens with demonizing birth mothers. A lot of people assume that the majority of birth mothers chose to give up their child or are, alcoholics or drug addicts or abusers, when that's absolutely not the case. 99% of birth mothers would have chosen to parent, if they could. 4% of that were because of those issues, right? But it's really, really sad that people in society demonize these mothers. First, they say oh, they're so selfless and, they were doing what's right. But then it's oh no, they were terrible people. Oh no, they shouldn't have parented, all this stuff. And we have to be aware of our wording when it comes to talking about people. No, I'm not saying that, a birth mother who is an alcoholic or who is on drugs shouldn't have a chance to parent. There's definitely levels of functioning, and they definitely deserve to get the help that they need, and, have a chance. So sometimes external care can be temporary, right? That's the point of foster care, is a temporary situation meant for reunification. But unfortunately, the whole system is incredibly flawed. We're talking private adoption, so it's even more flawed in different ways. But yeah, continuing on. Okay. And if you were ever going to redeem yourself in God's eyes, you were going to give his baby to a good Catholic family. I never believed that only a Catholic family was good, but I definitely believed I was flawed. I already believed that from the time I was about 5. So it didn't take a lot to really drill that home. All right, sorry, again, pausing. So when we talk about adoption and religion, we generally talk about adoption when it comes in the eyes of Catholicism, Christianity, and, Catholic religion, because there's a lot of pushing their religion and like, oh, you're a terrible person, especially if you speak out, whether you're a birth mom or you're an adoptee, and there's religious trauma. And a lot of the Catholic organizations praise adoption or use adoption to make billions in profits, right? But that's not to say that there isn't other religions that do this, specifically Judaism. They do. It's slightly better in the terms of religious trauma, but there's still trauma. There's still adoption laws that affect the child. They also don't demonize the birth mother or the child when they speak out. They're also way more open. They tend to be more open about open adoptions and telling the truth to the child and having those relationships, at least from my observation and what I could research. But again, that's not to say that they aren't out there. Now, if you're thinking about like the Islamic faith, the Islams don't do adoption. So they have, I forget what the term is. I'm going to have to do like a whole religious video, but they do what we would consider legal guardianship. So they do take in children, but they don't change their names. They don't demonize parents. They just accept the child as their own without a whole legal process of erasure. So in terms of that, I think it's really well done, because they're not erasing the other important parts of the child's identity. All right, moving on. Sorry, I went on a rant, and I'm going to have to do a longer video on that, but just some ideas for you guys, right? All right. The father of my child never came to see me. There was no communication with him at all. He knew that I was going away, and he knew the phone number. I wrote to him, and I think I called him once or twice when I first got there. He never responded, so I just let it alone. That's what I do. I get invisible. I just got invisible from his life. So I'm at this home and I make friends. There's the 14-year-old girl. She's a white girl and wicked tomboy. She was really fun. Then there was a black girl from Massachusetts who was about my age, who was very pretty, really nice hair, with a buffin like the Supremes. We became very fast and good friends. Then there was this girl from upstate New York. She was brilliant. She reminded me of my best friends from home. She had long strawberry blonde hair and those Ben Franklin glasses. Wow, she sounds like my adoptive mom, who is, by the way, from New York. But it's not her because she didn't have a baby. I always thought that girls my age wore those kind of glasses were immense potential. The 4 of us really connected, and I was also friendly with some of the other people, and with the mentally disabled lady who would go from room to room and talk to everybody. The home had 3 levels of marble stairs, so there was a lot of exercise involved in going from classroom to your room or to the lunchroom. The disabled woman threw herself down those stairs to try to kill her baby. She was only mildly, not fully there, but that was a time when if you had a freaking learning disability, you were labeled the R word. I think that was the case with her. She really could have been anything. It was also the time of a lot of meanness. If you looked different, if you had curly hair like I did, if you were anything but a stupid blonde, no offense, blue-eyed, tall, slim cheerleader, by the way, that still happens today. It's gotten a little bit better, but still happens. The beach girl thing was happening then. If you looked different, you were ostracized. If you were mentally disabled, on top of that, you were really ostracized. So she wasn't getting much warmth or compassion from the other girls. She was treated badly, and she threw herself down the stairs trying to kill the baby because she was so bad. This breaks my heart. I'm sorry, guys. That's hard. Because just having to live through the grape and then living through the forced pregnancy part, nothing is explained to you. You have no support. You don't have resources. You don't have a choice. And this is what we're in for in 2023, right? This is what's happening. Again, it's disgusting. Anyway, during this time, my dad would come to visit me alone, without my mother. It was the only time in my life I was ever with my dad alone. He came to visit me a lot. We weren't supposed to have any sweets at all. It was off limits, against the rules. He'd bring dozens and dozens of Dunkin' Donuts for us. He'd sneak them in a big brown paper bag with a handle, and he would take me and my 3 pregnant roommates out. He would sign the 4 of us out. So he's going out in the community with a 14-year-old pregnant girl, a black girl, the eccentric intellectual, and me, his daughter, and we're all hugely pregnant. He took us to the movies. We'd go to Chinatown for dinner. He took us to the museums. He wasn't ashamed. Okay, I just want to pause here. This dad sounds super supportive, even though he wasn't vocal. He deeply cared, not just about his own daughter, but about all these girls. Sorry, that's going to make me cry. Anyway, the only glimmer of happiness that we had was when we knew he was coming. And when he would leave, he'd give me a really big hug, the really tight kind where you don't have anything to say. My mom would always give me that nervous hug. She'd be crying, and it was kind of a weird hug, But he was actually there for me. The day I went into labor, my water broke, and I thought I had wet my pants. They took me down to the hospital. I was alone there, and nobody was friendly. Nobody was nice. Nobody said, "Don't worry, you're going to be okay." It wasn't overt meanness, but it was a total clinical indifference. Turn over, roll over, we're going to shave you. We're going to get an enema. Yikes. Sorry, I did not have that when I was in labor. Granted, my own labor was a total nightmare, but yeah, that I wasn't treated that badly. I just felt like I was being led by this invisible rope. Then they gave me a spinal, and within minutes, I'm numb from the waist down. They tell you that you cannot move. I remember them saying if I moved, there was a chance that I'd have some kind of permanent damage. So I also have this fear that I might be paralyzed for my whole life. You go through this whole process without anybody who's supposed to take care of about you being there. I didn't know it because I can't feel anything from the waist down, but I had shit the bed. That's just humiliating. Okay, so first of all, if you're pregnant and listening, or you may get pregnant at some times, I just want to say childbirth is crazy and wild, and they don't tell you a lot of information, so please just research it. I did know that this could happen, But yeah, even though it could totally feel humiliating. All right, anyway. I mean, there's another big shame ball right there. No pun intended. Then my arms were strapped down. Oh, God. Sorry. That's trauma right there. To the side of the table, like in the cuckoo's nest. And then they wheeled me into another room. They put my feet in the stirrups, and all of a sudden, I'm giving birth to a baby. I remember vaguely a suctioning kind of emptying out. A baby is born, and I see this unbelievable mass of black hair on this incredibly beautiful reddish-brown baby. The first thing I saw was this really long, sticking out crazy wild black hair like a boxing promoter guy. I'm sorry. The descriptions that Claudia uses are fantastic. That was my baby. Then after I gave birth, I'm really, really sore because, they gave me an episiotomy. I can't even say this word. Episiotomy. I'm surprised. So basically, it's where it's like the virgin stitch, if you guys ever heard of it. Basically, they stitch you back up so it's like you're a virgin. Doctors back then, even to this day, they do it. I had one as well. I wasn't asked. I wish I was. Not that I personally don't care, but it does happen because a husband or a male tends to ask. So it's always they consider it in the best interest of the male view. But yeah. Anyway, I'm surprised I don't sew it completely up on teenage Catholic girls. Just the whole damn thing. Just sew the whole damn thing up. So I'm in my room, and my roommate from the home came to see me. It was kind of weird because it's not something you should be celebrating, but it was like the end of this crazy time. The girls gave me flowers, and I remembered the mentally disabled girl had her baby. She came in the room and talked to me and brought me a gift. Oh, that's so sweet. I'm sorry. The girls were really compassionate. I named my baby Raina Elizabeth. Oh, I love that name. Elizabeth after my girlfriend. I did get to hold her for 3 days. She was beautiful. She had tiny little... Oh my God. I'm not crying, guys. She had a little tiny heart-shaped mouth, big dark eyes, beautiful roundish brown skin, and tons of black hair. I held and fed Raina as much as I could. And then on the 3rd day, my parents came. I had everything packed. I knew it was the day that I would be leaving the hospital. And I was leaving the baby in the nursery. We walked out of the hospital. My dad got in the driver's seat and my mom on the passenger side. I got in the back seat. We always had Chryslers because they were safe cars. They were like boats, huge. So my dad's way up there driving, totally white-knuckled, and I'm looking out the back window at the hospital and seeing the view of the hospital getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I flipped out. It was total 100% Rip Taylor wailing, screaming, crying, and nobody said a word. My mother didn't even turn around. I could tell she was crying because I could see her shoulders going up and down. My dad was white. He was like a statue driving the car. I just had that kind of cry that was a giant wailing, screaming, weeping until you are totally crumpled in and your whole body is crying. All right, pausing there. So this is the kind of way that babies react, like they need their mothers, right? The first 3 months is considered the 4th trimester. But we have to remember that adoption does not just affect the birth mother and the baby, which it absolutely does the most. However, there is generational trauma. It affects the grandparents. It affects aunts and uncles and cousins and future generations. So we have to think about it that way. Now, yes, does it directly affect the birth mother and the child the most? Absolutely. But there is that generational trauma as well. All right, anyway. In the beginning, It was the beginning of being invisible. It was never ever brought up again. It was never talked about, not once, not ever. I was never asked, "How are you? How are you feeling?" I don't even remember the ride home. I must have gone unconscious inside. I went back and graduated from school. Then a friend of mine had a 1950 Pontiac Chief, one of those fat cars that had the Indian chief on the hood. He was going to Aspen, Colorado. He was taking 5 friends, and there was room for one more person in the car. This was the summer of 1969, and there was a rumor that the Beatles were going to be in Aspen. So I said, definitely sign me up. I stayed away 30 years. When I was 40 years old, I initiated a search, and when I was 46, I met Raina. When I initiated the search, my daughter was a subsequent marriage was part of the whole thing. I told her the story when she was about 13 or 14 in the sex talk. I said, there's another reason I want you to be really well informed, because this is my story. I shared the whole thing with her. So I got the non-identifying information about Raina and did the registry thing. I called my mother and I said, look, I have to talk to you about something that we've never talked about. It's important to me. I have decided I'm going to initiate a search for my daughter. She doesn't say anything. I say, do you have any documents? Anything? Nobody's ever mentioned this all these years. My mom says, I don't think I do. She was very open to it. As a matter of fact, I think of it as a healing for her because it gave her a chance to be part of something and to say that she was really sorry. So again, this is something that we have to remember. It does affect other people. So quick personal story of mine is my mother gave me up for adoption thinking that her parents, my grandparents, weren't going to support her. She didn't even tell them that she was pregnant until after I was born. And when they found out, they were devastated. They were devastated. They would have supported her. Now, on the flip side, my birth father's side, they did not accept me at all, which is horrible, to say the least. My grandmother, my father and my grandmother didn't, but my great-grandfather did. And I know that had he had the chance, he would have done a kinship adoption, like he did to my half-brother. So it's a tough situation. All right, anyway. Raina was adopted by a family sort of like my family. They're conservative Catholic, Italian. Raina was light-skinned, and she could pass for Italian. Her parents were told the truth, but they were encouraged to lie. See, we should never lie to adoptees. They were dark-skinned Italian like my dad, who's Sicilian. I grew up with Italians who were darker than my black friend from the home. Catholic Charities told the couple who adopted Raina Elizabeth that there was no need to tell her that her father was black. What? Okay, anyway. I didn't know they were going to tell them this. I was just told, we have a young couple that want her. They know she's biracial, and they want her. They never said to me, we have a biracial couple, because who knew biracial couples existed in 1968? Actually, I did, but my parents certainly didn't. And Catholic Charities probably wouldn't let them in the freaking door. So maybe it was a naive assumption, but I assumed that they had somehow found a biracial couple. I remember feeling relieved because they said over and over, who's going to want this biracial baby? They're hard to place. All right, pausing there. So in one sense, Raina, the child that was adopted, is lucky that she had a biracial family to be adopted to. So she had some genetic marrying in that sense. But at the same time, biracial babies, while they are on the lowest of the adoption, that's not really what, these couples are looking for, these hopeful adoptive parents. Babies that are not white with blonde hair and blue eyes, as she mentioned, are cheaper, right? Remember, there's this whole menu based off race and gender and location and ethnicity and health and all the sorts of things. So it's really complex. I want to laugh, but I want to cry at the same time. It's terrible. Anyway, continuing on. I've met her now, so I know the story. She always knew she was different. She always knew that her skin was darker. Her hair was kinkier. She knew she was adopted, but she was led to believe that she was Italian. She was adopted by a family who lived maybe a mile down the street from where I had lived, and where my mother still lives now. What happened was, when Reina was about 19, she had a boyfriend who was Cape Verdean Portuguese, and her parents were absolutely ballistic. They said, "Can't you go out with boys that are your kind, Italian boys?" They were giving her a really hard time, but she got this rebel spirit in her. I know where that comes from, and she's gonna be who she's gonna be. So they're having this huge fight because Reina is totally in love with this boy. He's smart, he's nice, there's nothing wrong with him. She can't understand why her mother doesn't want her to go out with him. They get into this fight of fights, and Reina screams, "What do you have against Portuguese people?" And her mom says, "I don't have anything against them. You're Portuguese and I adopted you, didn't I?" Silence. Reina said, "What?" She got into her car and went to Catholic Charities and said, "I want to know my history. I want to know who I am." It was all in her file. So yeah, every child deserves to know who they are and where they come from. And adoptees are often not given full history or given history at all of who they are. Back in the day, like she said, they were told to lie. Now, it's less of that nowadays, although it does still happen. But they have every right to know. Now, if you are biologically kept, we call y'all the caps. Don't take offense to it. But you have access to all that information from the get-go because of your parents, because of your access to vital information that we don't have access to. It's a privilege that we don't have. So while she was lucky to go to Catholic Charities and get the file, most of us aren't that lucky. Anyway, she went back 3 times. The second time, she got the letter that I wrote. The social worker called and said, "I'm going to let you know that your daughter came in again." And we gave her your letter. She said she isn't ready to meet you, and to be quite honest, she doesn't know if she ever would be. It's fair, but it's also tough. Anyway, the social worker said something that led me to believe it might be a loyalty conflict with her mother, and I understood that. I thought, okay, I'm just going to let her hopefully grow beyond this. The social worker said, "What you can do is write another letter." The first letter I wrote was basically, "I want to meet you." It was probably just a couple of pages, but when the social worker said to me, "If I were you, I'd write another letter and I'll put it in the file," I sat down and I wrote a novel. And sure enough, within 6 months, Reina went back and wanted more information. She got that second letter. Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. Y'all, it's really hard to read this stuff and not be affected as an adoptee. Just saying. When she read it, she said to the social worker, "I'm not sure, but I think I might want to go through with this." What she was supposed to do was write a letter and take it to the agency. And then they would send it to me. But she's smart. She had all of the first names of the family members from my non-identifying letter, and she went to the public library, got the microfiche and goes through all the death notices of July of 1978 until she found my father's first name, address, and the names of the survivors. She gets into her car and goes right to my mother's house. Oh my Lord, I'm sorry. Y'all, I should probably read this stuff before I read it to you so I don't react like this. But yeah, oh my God. I cannot, this is way back in the day, but I could not imagine just pulling up to my grandmother's house and being like, hi, how are you? Like, even just the phone call that I made was hard enough. And like, I had that rejection, right? And it was tough. Like, I will tell you, I still think about it to this day. But anyway, we're continuing on. I'm in Colorado working at this boutique when she knocks on my mother's door. My mother's making macaroni. What's new? She comes to the door in her apron, and my daughter says, are you Claudia's mother? She says, yes. And she says, I'm Raina. I'm Claudia's daughter. My mother just grabbed her and smothered her with a big hug. Then she immediately calls my sister and says, you got to get over here right away. Claudia's daughter is here. Drop whatever you're doing. I need you here. So I'm closing the register at work, and the phone rings. I pick it up, and I hear this voice. Hello, is this Claudia? Yeah, this is Raina. Guys, I'm sorry. I'm trying not to cry. Oh my God, it's you. It's really you. She said, I'm at your mother's house. I said, what? Your what? She says, I'm at your mother's house. And I say, are you okay? She starts laughing. And in the background, I hear my mother screaming, oh my God, she looks just like you did at that age. And there's crying and screaming and laughing. And Raina laughs and says, I'm fine. I grew up just like this. We talked for 2 hours right then. I couldn't even think straight. I was mental. I hung up the phone. I closed up the store. I went home and told my daughter what happened. We were both mental. Then I called my friend, the travel agent. I said, I don't know where I'm going to get the money, but my daughter and I are flying home within the next 2 days. She met me at the airport. All of a sudden, here comes this beautiful woman. She's got on Levi's and a pair of black Doc Martens and a little black leather jacket. And she has hair like mine, really long, curly, down to her waist. She got those really big eyebrows and this beautiful smile, which I saw her father in right away. She was carrying 1 rose. We went to a restaurant and ordered all this food, but we didn't eat anything. We were looking at each other's fingers. I was looking at her ears. She was looking at my eyebrows. The genetic mirroring, that's what they were looking at. We're looking and talking, and it was just amazing. It was so amazing. She said, if we're going to have a relationship, I want you to know who I am. I'm gay, I said. I don't care. I really don't care because, oh my God, if you can find love, you're lucky. Raina says to me, tell me about my father. So I tell her. I tell her how magnificently beautiful he was and how I was so in love with him and what an amazing artist he is. And she says to me, I really, really want to meet him, but I don't want to interrupt his life. Even if I could just see him, I don't want anything from him. Well, I hadn't seen him since I was 19 years old. I contacted a friend of mine who knows him, and he says, I don't have his phone number, but I know where he works. I'll take you there, and then you're on your own. So my friend picks me up, and I'm shaking like a leaf. I'm more nervous about this than I was going to meet my daughter. It was about 11 in the morning. I go to the main door, and it's locked. I go to the side door, locked. I go to the back door, locked. So I'm standing in the yard, and I see this man with a baseball cap on. I'm way up on the steps, and he's down in the yard. He sees me and points to the door under the stairs. He says, the door is open if you want to get in. I'm thinking, maybe he knows him. So I walk toward him, and I go, excuse me, and he looks up what he's doing and takes a couple of steps forward, and I say, maybe you could help me. I'm looking for, he says, Claudia, and it's him. He's 60 years old. When I knew him, he was this gorgeous 31-year-old man. He's still handsome. He's still a beautiful man. He says, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Do you have a minute? We need to talk." He says, I always knew that I would see you again one day." He says, "I've thought about you over the years, and I've always thought, one day I'm going to see Claudia walking down the street." I said, "Remember when I had the baby in 1968? He nods his head. "Yeah." His eyes were kind of getting big. "Well, I met her." He doesn't say anything. He kind of just leans forward and says, "She's an amazing girl. She's beautiful, smart, articulate, amazing girl, and doesn't want anything from you. But she would love to meet you. Is there any chance that you would be willing to meet her? Just meet her." Oh my God. Sorry, guys. His eyes filled up with tears. Shh. Sorry, guys. "She's my family. Of course I'm going to meet her." Then the very next thing he says is, "I have to tell my wife." He had never told her. He went home and told his wife. She called me. Oh yeah, she called me. She's an amazing woman. They're amazing people. She was definitely taken aback. She told me that every April she used to think of me and would always say a prayer for me. She told me that she used to even say to him, "Remember Claudia? Remember your friend Claudia who went to that home for unwed mothers? That was so sad." He had 29 years to tell her, and he had opportunities, but he never did. Maybe he thought she would leave him. She told me it took a couple of days of praying and being alone and sitting with her rage, and then said, "Okay, I have another daughter." And that's when she called me. When she called me and said, "Claudia," I just got hysterical. I was just crying. I couldn't believe the courage. She said, "Look, let me just say right up front, I'm very glad that you came forward. We have a daughter now. We are family. I don't want you to feel bad about this because we share a daughter now. I'm in the process of the big time healing now. I moved back here 5 years ago to help my mom. She's 80 now. An Italian family, there's usually one who stays home. Now I'm that person. She needs me. She had complete knee replacement 5 years ago, but she's up and running now. We're taking Italian lessons together, and we're going back to Italy because she wants to go one more time before she dies." All right, guys, that is the end of Claudia's story before we get to chapter 4. I am ready to bawl after that. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that little, well, I shouldn't say fully enjoyed that story, but the reunion was precious, and that is a good reunion, right? Or a fairly good reunion. Both birth parents accepted it at that point. They were ready to be in a reunion with her. The adoptee, Raina, was ready to accept everything and be part of it. The grandparents, or the grandma, I should say, was ready to accept it. That is beautiful. The reunion part, not the whole forced birth adoption part. Anyway, I will see you guys Wednesday for chapter 4. So see you then.